education capitation. And to even set this stage even further, primary and secondary schools stare at crisis due to inadequate funding to sustain their operation. Secondary schools heads are now voicing their concern and that some core activities in the school's calendar are now bound to adversely affected by the delays in the release of full capitation fund by the government. And now joining me in the discussion, rather in this conversation, is Boaz Waruku, Policy and Strategy Advisor, Elimu Bora Working Group, and also will be joining me later on as soon as of course, she gets in, we'll drop her into the discussion. That is Janet Ouko, education expert. Well, thank you so much, of course, for making time to speak to KUTV. Well,
thank you, Evans.
The whole issue of school capitation, to some extent, many might say it's really disturbing and quite disappointing. But this begs the question, how did you even get here in the first place?
Thank you very much, Evans. One, we are in a situation in this country currently where what should have been prioritized and put at the forefront in terms of financing or allocating resources and transmitting is not being looked at as a priority.
Okay.
That is education. But if you do remember, let me take you back. You realize that education agenda did make Kenyans to come out so much during the campaigns. And indeed, they were saying we need something to be fixed. Mm-hmm. Among the things they wanted fixed were the lapses that now we are still seeing continuing. One is the financing. The details of others, including the curriculum itself and all that, I don't want to get into, but because the focus, you're saying, is on the capitation. There are many problems inherent in our capitation of the schools and, say, education institutions. One is that the amounts that we are even now struggling to see that we put them together and transmit have not been professionally costed and arrived at. Why do I say so? Because you see obvious signs of confusion in a way. I'll give you the example of having our children within the basic education cycle. Mm-hmm. That the basic education, it includes the 2 years of pre-primary, right, the primary, and then the secondary. At the pre-primary, that information has not even been made uniform because that is a mandate that has been given to the county governments. Okay. You won't tell what county is transmitting how much money per child. But come to the primary school, the Universal Primary Education Fund is actually supposed to be a fund that's supposed to be allocated and transmitted to the schools. How much is that? Mm-hmm. It's a paltry 1,400 per year. And that was decided many years ago. And right now, when the inflation has really gone high, we are still stuck with that. If you ask how was it costed, how did they arrive at that, it's still a problem. But even that little amount that had been earmarked is still a problem to get and transmit or transfer to the schools, because that is where it's the most important. Then you come to with the CBC, there's a junior secondary school. The students there, out of the blues, you're being told that each student is allocated how much? 15,000 annually. That is a junior secondary school which has been domiciled in a primary school where there's no laboratory, where there's no workshop, where there's completely nothing. Meaning that the requirements there are so much, and yet there's 15,000 allocated per student. Okay. Come to the secondary school, you find a student is allocated 22,245 there. And this is in a secondary school or a high school which has been well established. The labs are there.
Right.
I mean, you're only required to buy chemicals and things like that. And yet, the allocation, you're seeing that it's a marked difference from the junior secondary school. Junior secondary school is a secondary school. If what CBC purveyors, what they sold to us is that is a secondary school.
Okay.
So I started from there because I want to tell you the arbitrariness with which first we just allocate resources. And that arbitrariness is like the cancer which is also in this Ministry of Education. Why? Because even when things are supposed to be structured, planned well, streamlined, so that then we get to know in a predictable manner, like when the president did appoint the Presidential Working Party, that should have been giving us indication of what are the Kenyans saying, what have they recommended and suggested, that even before those reports could be made available, we are seeing implementation of things which are arriving or being arrived at like in a pedestrian way, like roadside declaration. So there are lots of things.
And we will talk about you know, the failures and the steps that could have been taken to actually bring, you know, the train back on its, you know, feet. And I want us to take a look at the, you know, allocation as far as the Ministry of Education is concerned. And actually they received the lion's share of this budget, over 600 billion. That is quite big enough. And if you can break it down, I don't know if my director has that figures so that we can take it down to you. Like we can see the likes of TVET were given 28.2 billion. Youth training and development, that is 55.6 million. Then we have higher education and research, that is 128.6 billion. University education, 127.4 billion. Then we have primary education, 32.3 billion. Secondary education, that is 103 billion. We have teachers resource, that is Teachers Service Commission, that just to deal with the, you know, recruiting teachers to meet the demand of teacher-learner ratio, that is 314.9 billion. Actually, the lion's share as far as distribution of this particular fund is concerned. Then we have basic education, 147.8 billion. When you look at this allocation, and I want us to focus on primary education and secondary education, does it, you know, some sort of spark confidence in you? Do you think now this could be the roadmap now to at least now returning to normalcy?
Thank you, Evans. If these figures were arrived at scientifically, I would be persuaded to think the same. You started by indicating that education has received the lion's share. Yes, education has been receiving the lion's share for so many years. Why? Because education is the largest department that we have. So the ministry that has been put together under education is where almost everywhere and in every place you'll find that ministry being felt there. Right from the villages where there are schools with teachers there and all that. It is all over. The materials that are required, the books and all that, it is all over. So to the extent that I would say anybody who thought that there could be a ministry that would receive higher, then that is a mistaken person. So let's not start from by saying that education has been given the largest share. You're supposed to make resources follow functions which are provided for. You're supposed to actually dissect into minute details the components, that then you can say for each of these components, how do you cost it? That is where I was starting from. And I was trying to show how instead we've been arbitrary. In fact, all of a sudden we've been arbitrary that anybody can just emerge with anything and tell you this is where we are going. So I was trying to pin it down and say, I would have been comfortable if the Presidential Working Party had produced a report which is well analyzed and indicating on what really are the key requirements we need to invest in there, which probably would even make us want to look at it in a better way. For example, this budget, look at the allocation given to the TSC to recruit teachers and ensure that those teachers get to the schools, retooled and all that, because of a new system. As we speak now, the first batch that was done for this recruitment was 30,000, and then there was some 5,000 additional of those who had qualified but were still teaching in primary school. They were given a chance to get to the JSS.
Yeah.
With that number, 35,000, there's no JSS that has more than 2 teachers. All those junior secondary schools, they have 1 or 2 teachers maximum. Some of those schools have multiple streams. So, and each, the JSS grade 7, just to be simple, grade 7, they have how many learning areas? 14. They are trained. In fact, KU is actually the citadel of teacher development. And here you'd be told that they are trained on 2 subjects. The subject matter is 2. If they have a third one, that is just a support. But the core subjects which they are taught to teach, or they're trained to teach, are 2. So when you have one teacher with, say, 3-streamed grade 7, and each of those classes, they're supposed to teach 14 teaching areas. Are you saying that we are having quality? We are having a problem. So that's why, for me, let us be more realistic in the way we plan. And planning here in its wholesomeness, including financial planning, that is the budgeting process. So that by now we would have been saying, other department and other sectors, please don't cry so much. We have to fix education first. As a Elimu Bora working group, we are actually saying that there's a way in which we've been attempting to reform education right from 1964. You've seen so many of those, the Ominde commissions, the Gastati commissions. We had Professor Douglas Odhiambo, and right now we are also having the Munavu task force. Many of those commissions, if you look at them, one thing they've been missing is the financing component. Look at the 844, the way they introduced, and they introduced a very practical kind of system with a curriculum that would allow students really to be practically oriented, but also stimulating to the mind. But with time, they started easing out and removing components like the art and craft, the music, and all that. They removed them completely. Why? Not because they didn't like them, but it's because the costing was not done. And so when the teachers were supposed to deliver them, they could not. They didn't have the material. It's because we did not look at the costing. The financing component is key in any reform process. As a Elimu Bora working group, we took time to analyze what are the issues that have really been bogging us down. Every time we attempt to reform the education, we still come back to the same situation. 844 fell back until it became what now is known as the more theoretical, exam-oriented, and all that. You see? CBC would go the same way. Because the way you've heard how the parents have been crying, because what has happened is that the government is running away from its core responsibility to provide basic education. It's doing so by transferring that responsibility to the parents. When it does so, then the parents themselves are already overwhelmed. The kind of weight that a parent is shouldering. I'm not saying that they shouldn't provide uniform, for example. And in any case, who said that uniform is the only way that children could learn? Because there's a way in which you can also identify the students. So one thing I would be saying is that let the government become more realistic in terms of costing. And once costed and once agreed, for example, that this amount of resources that would be transferred to the schools, they are to be transferred on time. Actually, they should be transferred before any term begins. When they do so, it means that the management of the school, the teachers and the head teachers, they will plan very well.
Okay. Hold on to that thought of, how to transfer funds and all that. But you have spoken to my curiosity. You talked about, it's like we are making, progress, 1 foot forward, 2 steps backward.
Yes.
And according to you, as Elimu Bora, of course, you have been on the ground. You have assessed the situation the way it is, and probably you have some solution.
We have actually developed a framework, which we are calling irreducible minimum on the principles and the standards which must be adhered to in education for it to be realistic. We launched that last month on 28th of May in Nairobi.
Okay.
Yes.
I want you to talk to us about how you think those solutions could actually be a game changer as far as education sector is concerned, and of course the capitation, and how best, even the stakeholders, those who are concerned with the, policy formulating, can actually borrow something from you or even a leaf from your side and actually push this agenda.
I'll take the angle that you'd given on the financing and the grant, the capitation grant making. In our analysis and understanding, knowing that every administration comes on board and their priorities could even change, we said there must be an establishment of a national education fund. Within that fund, and this is the education fund which should be a charge of the consolidated fund, meaning it is part of the annual tax, that is tax revenue that is collected. We've given the example of how it happens in Nigeria. They have an Uzbek, a universal basic education fund. It is run by a commission. It is a fund where every year, in their case, it is 2.5%. Every year, that amount generated from tax, that percentage is hived off and put into that fund. And it has no recall back. The moment it goes in there, it must remain there. And other sources are also encouraged, and resources are brought in there. From that fund, what does it do? That fund ensures that all the infrastructure in the schools countrywide, wherever they are, for them, they do it by matching grants with the states, because Nigeria being a federal state, you see, they match the fund so that it becomes easier and quicker to build infrastructure, build new schools, build even laboratories. In our country, the idea of even building classrooms and all that had been abandoned and left to the school management and the parents and all that, until Uhuru's administration through Magoa rushed through that last stretch when they were constructing some CBC classrooms in secondary schools, which also became misplaced, because then these CBC JSS got domiciled in primary school. So we're saying a national education fund that has properly been structured properly, with that mandate to do, I'm talking of infrastructure development, continuous professional development of teachers, getting resources for that kind of work, working very closely with the Teacher Service Commission, and indeed ensuring that teachers are also being absorbed sufficient and adequate to deliver on the curriculum that is there. And the key component also of this fund are the ones that would help in the research component. Why? Because through research is where we get innovative ideas. This is where we actually can get ideas to incubate and even become the industrial world of the decades, just the next decades, which are just ahead of us here. So we are saying such a fund is very, very important for us to be done. And two, we also diagnosed and realized that there's multiplicity of policies all over. If you're asking for a national education policy, you'll not find it in one place. We are saying that it's the right time for Kenya to evolve a comprehensive national education policy which clearly also articulates our philosophy of education.
Fair enough. Well, now let's face the elephant in the room. Now, the school head, that is secondary school head, in their conference that was held in Mombasa, one of the key things they are advocating for the additional, increase of capitation from 22 to 30. And according to them, they say the government, yes, has released fund 24 billion out of, they were promised 28, but they received 24. But out of this 24, they are saying that it has been used to service debts and even, to pay the recurrent expenditure. And now they are saying there is no money to run, the institution. What do you foresee? What is the problem here? In as much as, we talk about the policy, the government, allocating a lion's share of budget to education sector. I remember in the last financial year, the government allocated to the tune of almost over 500 billion. That is quite a huge sum of money. But why are we struggling?
We're struggling because it is still a peanut. For as long as it is not been scientifically derived, it will still be a drop in the ocean. Why? Take the example of this capitation being transmitted or transferred to the schools. That grant is what is supposed to be used by the schools to buy foodstuffs and all that for the students, isn't it? But look at how the cost of bags of maize, bags of beans, and all the ingredients, all the materials they require to make that meal, they are almost doubled. When they are doubling, the government first is delaying on remitting even that small amount, and two, when they are remitting, of course, they are bringing it so late that you're told that in the entire term, actually the amount that was being remitted last week is the amount that was to top up and clear the arrears of term 1, so that they start now even the term 2. When that happens and the amount is inadequate, the suppliers of the schools are in dire stress. In fact, many of them, because they are the local business people, their businesses are also crumbling. Why? Because they do not have money even to go buy a new supply so that they can supply the schools. So we still have a lot of problem. And the government continuing to promise, I think the Ministry of Education has been so used to saying the funds will arrive this Friday. And tomorrow is Friday. They really love Friday. Or next week. And next week doesn't come. I think they need to plan very well and give education the priority it deserves. In addition, they also require to just revisit this amount. Why am I saying so? Because I've just told you. I mean, a bag of maize, that's a 90-kilogram bag. They were actually costing this when it was costing about 4,000 shillings maximum. Right now it is 7,000. All right. 7,000, 8,000, almost double. Okay. So it means that this amount becomes so insufficient. And if you want to see, why do you think the students were sent home early this time? Okay,
I was coming to
Why do you think they were sent home early? It's because the teachers do not have the resources to run the schools.
All right. Yeah. Even because of we are running, out of time, but I want you to actually match this point. We have seen some sort of defiant nature from, school heads. The ministry is clear, don't increase school fees, don't the midterm that was, most head teachers actually they had to send learners very early, contrary to what the Ministry of Education had actually advised. What are you reading? Are you seeing a Ministry of Education that is toothless? Yet this is, an institution that is supposed to actually, regulate the operation and, of course, how the framework of the learning institution actually are guided and operate.
The head teachers have got a point, and that is why they may stand up and tell the education cabinet secretary that you live in Rome, you are not a Kenyan, you don't live here, you don't understand us. Because if the minister is still not getting the message they are sending, they are saying the cost of skyrocketed.
Okay.
By them talking of we want the increase in the allocation. This is for the allocation per child that the ministry gives from 22,245. They want it to go to 30,000. I think that would be that looks fairly reasonable from the ministry. This is not the fee that is to come from the parents.
Okay.
But let me get to the foundations of what we are talking about, even within our own irreducible minimums and foundations. We are saying education first is a basic right.
Okay.
Why? Because we are simply restating what is a fact in our Constitution, Article 43, the Children's Right, also Article 53. It is unequivocally provided for that education is a basic right, that basic education is a fundamental right that must be given in a compulsory nature and free of charge to the children. That is from primary, pre-primary up to the higher education, up to Form 4. And it's actually providing also that progressively we should be aiming at even making higher education free, university education free. So our clarion call and our foundational thing, we actually say that basic education once and for all should first even be free and compulsory, so that we should not have been even discussing the issues of the fees and all that. Well, the government should provide. That is an obligation they have. They have signed so many instruments, by the way.
Thank you.
That declares that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we are actually out of time.